Coming up on episode 31 of the Create If Writing podcast.
If you want something done, ask someone who's really busy. I think it's totally true. Process, it's not like a rigid thing. It's organic, and you have to really know yourself.
I can't go back to sleep. It's almost like
Let's figure out who you are as a writer in your natural habitat, and then let's figure out how to maximize that behavior.
I won the start, but disappearing from the horizon.
Hello and welcome to the Create If Writing podcast. This is episode 31 and I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant. This week, I am diving into part 2 of an interview with Gabriela Pereira from DIY MFA. And I feel like this has been like the month of our mutual admiration and love fest because last week I was on her podcast over at DIY MFA. And you can find that over at DIYMFA.com, and it's episode 78. So that was a ton of fun. We talked about email lists because, you guys know I like to talk email lists. And the last time she was on, we talked about writers in community, specifically how she started the DIY MFA community and what writers need from each other, even though writing can be a solitary thing. In the second half of the interview, which was just so long I wanted to break it up, and it naturally did that in 2 kind of segments. This segment is all about writing process, and Gabriela talks us through her process of writing her book, DIY MFA, which is coming out later this spring. I can't wait. So she has some real gems about how to figure out your writing process, because if you don't know your writing process, you are going to have a harder time writing. It's going to take you longer, and you may not be producing your best work. So we're not going to tell you what your process is. That's totally up to you. But she talks through what she discovered along the way writing a book while still running a site and having a child and doing a podcast full time. And I share a few things that I've learned along the way, mostly the hard way, because that's how I learn. So a few quick things before we get to the interview. I want to thank you guys so much again for listening, and would love to have you guys be more permanent. And by that, I mean join the community. I have an email list that you can sign up for, and I also would love to invite you to join our Facebook group, the Create If Writing Facebook group, which you can find searching for Create If Writing. So in the Facebook group, we do a lot of just sharing things. I feature community members, people ask questions, we share helpful links, and you kind of keep up with the different things going on with me because I always have a lot of hats on and balls in the air and all of those different metaphors that don't fully fit. But that's a great place to keep connected with other creative types. And it doesn't matter whether you feel super creative. If you're a writer, if you're an artist of some other kind, we have a diverse group in there. And so that's a lot of fun. As far as email, you are going to be the first one to know about anything that I have going on, about the podcast episodes, about live training workshops, and any awesome freebies I have. You guys get them first. So you definitely want to subscribe. If you want to head over to the show notes, you can find all the information from today's episode, the links, and also you can subscribe to the email list there. So that's going to be at createifwriting.com/031 for episode 31. The other thing I wanted to ask is if you are listening through iTunes, I would love it if you subscribe and leave a review. I know the numbers and I know how many of you are listening, and my review number is very small. And so I would love some help in getting up above. My goal is 50. I think that's a pretty reasonable number based on how many of you guys listen. So even if you're not listening through iTunes, I would love it if you left me a review there, because that's kind of one of the big places that it matters. And I know that it's a big pain. I hate leaving reviews because you have to go through all the steps, but you go to iTunes, find the podcast, then you have to go into the app and look for the place to review where all the stars are. So I would really appreciate it if you're listening, if you took a few minutes to do that. That means a lot to me. I do have one more thing that's kind of exciting that I wanted to tell you guys about. I'm updating the information for my course, Own Your List, which is the everything email A to Z course. And I'm doing new videos for each module. What I decided to do for this is actually to do them as live workshops so people can watch them as they would a webinar, and I'll take questions at the end. I don't want to do them in the middle. I won't respond to the chat like I usually do, just so it's more evergreen. So a year from now, people aren't like, who's Carly and why is she talking to Carly in the middle of this training? But at the end, I'll do a Q&A, which I will include as a part of the course. If you're not in the course and you just want some email training, I split them up into packages so you can buy, one workshop and just get for $15, you can listen in live, get a replay and the slides from that one particular workshop. And there's 6 modules to the course. So you have 6 video options to get. And the first, let's see if I can remember off the top of my head with no notes. The first is content and strategy. And it's all about trying to figure out how often you should send and what you should send, and kind of figuring out your overall game plan for email. Why are you using it and what should you send based on your goals? The second is growth and promotion. And I see a lot of email courses launching around this idea of how to grow your list. But if you don't know all the other parts, then it's, you have this big list and you don't know what to do with it. So definitely that's an important part. And what people are very interested in is growing. But if you don't know the content, it's kind of hard because then, again, you have a list and you're not sure what to do with it. So the second is that growth and promotion. The third is dealing with your engaged fans and actually how to take them beyond engaged and make them into super fans. The fourth is what to do with the people who are not engaged. So it's all about list cleaning and how to treat those people. And there are some really fun and exciting and kind of awful things that happen in the email world that I'm going to share in that one as bad examples of what not to do with your people. And then the fifth is going to deal with autoresponders and lists, why you should use autoresponders, if you should, for your purposes, what that can look like, and then how to segment, target, tag, split up your list. The terms for this are different depending on your email service provider, but it's basically list management, how to kind of organize all your subscribers in a way that is most effective. And then the last piece is one that people are also really interested in, and that's monetization. How to make money with your email list. Because all these entrepreneurs are always shouting at you, the money's in the list, the money's in the list. Well, is it? And how do you access that money that's in the list? And also, how do you access that money without feeling smarmy about it? Because again, these are your best people. We don't think of them as numbers or dollar signs. So that sixth part is all about how to monetize your list without feeling smarmy and gross. So I'm really excited about that. But I will leave the link to that as well in the show notes. So createifwriting.com/031. And I would love to see you there. So if you do purchase those one at a time, you can purchase all 6 for $80. And the course itself is $297. And the course includes a whole lot of extra things like a private Facebook group, workbooks, worksheets, course lessons, and exclusive interviews with other email gurus or people that are just kind of sharing the way that they have grown or managed or the way they handle their list. So you can get one at a time for $15 a piece, buy all 6 for $80 and save $10, or just go ahead and get the whole course, which I would highly recommend. Okay, that's enough. Let's go ahead and get down into the interview with Gabriela Pereira from DIY MFA and find out your writing process. Well, I want to talk about your book and how it is, we're talking about all this community building, and it's a job. It's an awesome job. But when you have a site and a podcast and a community that you're running and courses, how in the world do you write a book and get all that done at the same time? Like, what was that experience like for you?
So writing the book was a really informative experience. I learned a lot about myself as I was writing the book. I learned that I'm very good if I have deadlines. I am not very good if I don't. I also learned that I do not write very well in my home or in my office. So I had to get myself out of both of those spaces in order to write the book. So I got myself into a very regimented routine. I would walk my son to school, and then around the corner from his school, there was a Starbucks, and I made friends with all the baristas, and I would go in there every morning and I'd get my, cup of coffee, and I'd sit down and write for 3 hours until my son was done with school. And then I'd pick him up and go home. And it's like I'd clock in my hours and then I was done. And, towards the end, as I neared the deadlines, I had to sort of extend my writing stretches for a bit longer. But having this sort of contained space where I knew like I have only this amount of time, I have to get as much done in this time as I can. And then I knew like once I picked up my son and I brought him home and, then we had a babysitter in the afternoon, and then I'd like go to the office and actually do work. It was sort of bizarre. I realized that like I could get the same amount of work done in the afternoon hours as I would normally take the whole day to do. But because I didn't have the whole day, I didn't like putter around, and I didn't, check Facebook 8 billion times. And I didn't like sit around and look at Twitter or however, like all those rabbit holes that I usually go down and I end up getting sidetracked. I just became a lot more efficient. So there's something to that. People talk about, if you want something done, ask someone who's really busy. I think it's totally true because it's not like the hours didn't magically appear. It's just that I had to be efficient. So I found a way to be efficient. So that's kind of how it happened. Like it wasn't like magic. It was just having a structure and understanding my own process. Like, obviously I tried writing at home and I tried writing in the office, and I realized like that was not going to work because my output was really bad. So I tried different things until I eventually found what worked. And then I got into this groove and did it. The other thing too is I had about 8 months to my first deadline from when I signed with my publisher to when I had to deliver the first part of the manuscript. And I started working on that manuscript as soon as I signed the contract. I didn't write a whole lot in the beginning because a lot of those first few months was me trying to figure out what my process was. So like my output in the beginning was pretty pitiful, but I was still working. It was just more like honing the writing process. And by the time I hit I signed the contract in December. By the time I hit like March, April, I was pretty much in the groove. And at that point, then I could like sit down 5 days a week and crank out several thousand words in, a couple of hours. So at that point, like the rest of the book sort of moved a lot faster because I was, I figured out the way to make myself be the most efficient I could be. So I think that's something that a lot of writers and a lot of people in general, they jump from, zero to actually doing whatever it is they want to do, but they don't stop to actually figure out their process. And that's something that like in DIY MFA, it's the very first thing I teach all my students is like, let's figure out who you are as a writer in your natural habitat. And then let's figure out how to maximize that behavior before we even think about writing a book or cranking out however many words or whatever. Like we need to just figure out what's the most effective pattern for you. And that's sort of what I did on myself in the beginning of the writing stretch. And then, so once I did that, the final manuscript was something close to like 108,000 words, which is ridiculously long. And it's going to have to get cut. And my editor and I are working on that right now. But I dubbed it The Beast exactly because it was such a monstrosity. But I did, a lot of that flowed really quickly because I took that time in the beginning to lay the foundation and understand who I was as a writer and like what's my, ideal environment.
I love that you start with that when you're teaching people, because I totally agree. Like if you don't know your process, everything just takes longer. And I realized in college, like my senior year, I finally figured out how I wrote papers best. And I was like, man, if I'd only, I was an English major, so I wrote so many papers. And I was like, if I'd only figured this out my freshman year, then I would have wasted a lot less time writing, and doing stupid stuff and slogging through. When I actually kind of figured out what worked for me, it went fast. And I think I've figured out a little bit more of my process now, and I'm the same as you. I really like to get out of the house because there's too many things. I wish Starbucks or, one of my local coffee shops, I wish I could pay them like a monthly fee, like
I know, right?
Because it gets really expensive. Like every coffee is like $3 or $4 unless you're buying straight coffee, and then you're okay. Yeah. But, like here's my $30 a month to come in whenever I want and have a coffee. Can we do that? Like that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I think writers would take advantage of that. Maybe too much, but I like that a lot. And, kind of the idea of busyness too and finding more time. When we were married, we had 5 years without kids. And now I think, oh my goodness, what books could I have written in those years? I did get my MFA. I wrote a book in that time, but how much time I could have spent. Whereas now I'm doing so many things and I have kids and people ask, how do you do it? And I don't sleep a lot. I'll say that, I don't require a lot. Like I'm a 5 to 6 hour a night girl and I'm fine.
Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. If I could sleep less than like 8 hours a day, I would be so like oh my gosh,
think
what
of
I
what
could
you
do
could
with
do.
those 3 hours.
Yeah. So I do, I'm very thankful that I don't require sleep because I do get a lot done there. But, the same thing, like you realize, okay, this is the only time I have and I have to get it done. And on the flip side of that, this past month I tried to do nano because for years, really, since I had my second child, we have 4, I have not written fiction because I have to go live in that place and wallow there and be with the characters. And then when I get interrupted, I become the beast, and I get really cranky, and I don't want to live like that. I don't want to have my family stay away from mom. She's crazy right now. And so I was like, you know what? I think maybe this is just an excuse and I'm afraid. And so let's just dive back in and we'll do nano. Well, I got through 3 days. I was ahead of schedule. And then I got 2 kids with pneumonia. And I was okay, this is why, and I was like, it's not an excuse. Cause for years I kind of have said I'll write when my kids are all in a school. Cause right now 2 of them are in elementary and then 2 are in kind of a Mother's Day out 2 days a week. And I'm like, surely I could do something. I must be making an excuse, but literally at every turn the past month, something. And then after they got over pneumonia, another kid got sick. And so all of my work time was gone. And even the things I planned to do at night, it just didn't work. And so I was like, okay, well, this is helpful because I know, I can work on nonfiction. I can do a podcast. I can do blogging in these little bursts of time. But for me, fiction, that's just not my process. I lose it and it goes off the rails. And so anyway, it makes me sad because I really have stuff I want to do, but we're just going to have to be patient over here and wait till I can, because I can do a lot, but that's not one of the things I can do. So learning your limitations and your process are super important to get things done.
And I also want to stress something too, because when I talk about process, my process is that I'm a mess. I really am a hot mess when I'm writing. And my husband dubs it feast or famine because I will go months and months without writing anything, without being productive. And then it'll be binging. And in college and in grad school, I was especially bad about this, where I would do no work and then I'd binge and I'd write 4 term papers in a weekend. And I mean, I literally wrote my theses, basically all of my theses, within a week, multiple hundreds of pages. Yeah. It was crazy. And honestly, that was just unhealthy. Looking back on it now, I'm wow, I was not a happy person and I was not very healthy and I didn't treat my body very well and it wasn't sustainable. And so for me, writing the DIY MFA book, the goals that I set for myself weren't just to actually write the book, but I wanted to write the book in a sane way. So I was very strict with myself. I was not allowed to pull all-nighters. I was not allowed to work past dinner time. And I was really strict with myself, and I actually held myself to it. I am proud to say I did not pull a single all-nighter. I slept a full 8 hours every night that I was writing this book. And for me, this is huge because usually I'm all over the place. But at the same time, I want to also stress to writers that finding your process it's not about imposing someone else's process or structure. And so, I read Stephen King's book on writing once upon a time, and I tried to flog myself into writing exactly 2,000 words a day, every single day. And that lasted for about 2 days. And then I had a nervous breakdown. And it just was not me, right? Because I'm still very free flowing. And there's some days that are going to be 100-word days and some days that are going to be 10,000-word days. And that's just the way I behave as a writer. But understanding what your natural state is and then adjusting it enough so that you don't make yourself crazy, basically, and sort of adjusting it so that you can be healthy and so that you can treat yourself kindly, as opposed to trying to just impose all right, this is how I'm going to do and be really rigid about it. You don't want to do that because then you're going to just squash all of that creative energy. So for me, it was sort of finding that balance between a pattern that I could sustain and that would give me creative energy and that would keep me motivated and would help me maximize my output, but also do it in a way that did not involve crazy all-nighters and not sleeping and skipping meals and all that, those bad habits that were not good for me, both on a health basis and also on a sort of a, mindset basis. back, from college and graduate school. So it was kind of a dual challenge. I guess that's the thing I want to stress about process. It's not like a rigid thing. It's organic, and you have to really know yourself and know sort of how to nurture yourself.
Yeah, there's so much to writing that it's a creative discipline, and finding how those things work together, that it's an art and you have to let it be, but you also, it's work, and you do have to show up and you do have to do the work. So finding, like you said, what works for you. And I say that a lot in the blogging realm and when I'm talking to different people in my community, that, read what all the smart people say, read what people say that have been there, and then do what works for you. Maybe this is the thing that works for you. Maybe this is, but you got to try it and figure it out. And sometimes it does change through time, depending on your circumstances. Like I think kind of the basis of how I work is the same, but now that I have children, there are certain things that have to be so. Like you said, not pulling all-nighters, I've got 4 kids. I can't make like a 1 a.m. run to 7-Eleven to get Twizzlers and Mountain Dew so I can stay up till 4. Like that does not work anymore. I have little people that are going to wake me up at 6 if I'm lucky, not before 6, So that there are certain rules now that apply that keep me in a safe space. And so, yeah, finding what works for you, finding even what works in a certain season. Like I said, this is not a season where I feel like I can write fiction and be healthy. And so I'm writing other stuff, and that helps me not go crazy because I have, like a creative drive. So I'm like, well, pour that into somewhere else that's manageable in my current state, and I know what's waiting for me on the other side. And whenever, I get a chance. And sometimes every now and then I'll get, my husband is amazing and will give me like a weekend away. And I remember, so like 2 years ago or 3, I got a weekend away and I was working on final edits for some piece of fiction. So I must have only had 2 kids because that was at the point where I was like, okay, this is not working. And it took a weekend away. And in, I think it was 2 full days, I was able to I was insane. And I didn't sleep really for that either, but I like edited 150 pages of a manuscript, and I painted 3 paintings, and I read like 4 books, and I don't think I showered or did anything else, but I had this like, when you have kids, you realize how much time is worth, I think. And so that 2 days became like this insanely, like the most productive 2 days of my entire life, because I knew every single second, and I loved it. It wasn't like I was stressed out. It was like, I can do any of these things and not have to take care of anybody else. And so it was really fun, but often, that is totally rare that I get to do that. And so, yeah, finding the process that works for you and then works in your situation is, it'll help you work faster. It'll help you work better and also stay sane. Like that's a great goal that you had to like stay sane. And I want to like people. Like sometimes that's just my goal. Like what can I write, but also still like the people that I know,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, the other thing too, I mean, this is actually something that took me by surprise with both the DIY MFA book and DIY MFA in general. So when I started this project, it was very, and like, back in my little personal blog, it was very like nuts and bolts craft oriented. It was very much like, here's how you write a good character. Here's how you write a villain. Here's how these are character archetypes or plot archetypes or whatever. Everything was very categorized and organized and all that stuff. But what I've realized over time is that there's a lot more sort of mindset stuff and sort of more philosophical stuff going on. And that's sort of become much more front and center in sort of the DIY MFA website, in our course, in the book. I mean, it became much more sort of like I sort of developed almost like a creativity manifesto or like mindfulness manifesto for creativity. And one of the main aspects of it is this idea. It comes actually from sort of like Zen Buddhism ideas, which is this concept of like pain versus suffering. And, the pain is a very objective thing. Like you cut your finger, it's going to hurt. You don't make your word count, and that just doesn't, that makes you feel bad. But the suffering is kind of the additional angst that you throw on top of that. So, the analogy I often give is this idea of like, I'm a New Yorker, so I'm in the subway and the subway stops and it's not at a station. So I'm basically stuck there and I'm late for a meeting. And the pain is, okay, I'm late for a meeting. Like this stinks. But the suffering is then all of the other angst that I throw on top of it. Like, oh my gosh, I'm late for a meeting and I'm not going to get there. And I check my watch every 10 seconds and I'm like making myself crazy while I'm, stuck in the subway. And that has influenced a lot about my approach to writing and my approach to work. It's like, being angsty and complaining and whining about stuff does not magically make things get done, as I have discovered. It might make me feel better for like a split second, but it doesn't magically make words appear on the page. It doesn't magically tick things off of the to-do list. It just makes me feel worse eventually. So one of the big things that I sort of focused on as I was working on this book and as I've been sort of developing my process as a, entrepreneur and as a person in general is trying to eliminate as much suffering as I can, like trying not to pile on that additional angst. Like if inevitably failure happens, inevitably we don't meet a deadline or we make a mistake. That happens. It's part of being human. It's normal, apparently. But at the end of the day, like adding all of that extra like, you miss a deadline or you forget to post a blog post and all of a sudden it's like, I'm the worst blogger in the world and everybody's going to hate me and blah, blah, blah. And I'm, it just doesn't help. So I kind of want to stress that too, because sometimes it's very easy to talk about being productive and, maximizing our output or whatever, but you need to be kind to yourself and not, let yourself slide when you make a mistake or when you have a setback. It's okay. The world will not end.
That's really good to know. Because, I think anytime you have some kind of mental suffering or mental hang up, it's much harder to be creative. I mean, we all know that because we've all had that. It's really hard to work and be free when you're not, as you said, being kind to yourself. So, I feel like this has loosened me up to get some good work done later today.
And let me tell you, it's really hard for me to be kind to myself. I have this little system that I use. I have a jar on my desk. It's called the angst jar. Every time I start like angsting over anything, and I mean, this happens like someone sends me an email and they're a little snippy in their tone and I get like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst person ever. And so I write myself a little note and I, send the note some love and I put it in the angst jar and then I try my best to let it go. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. And like sometimes the bad stuff that happens, it could be a major rejection, like your publisher doesn't want to publish your book or something big, big or small, you need to find a way to kind of contain that angst so it's not in your way as a creative person, or else, I mean, I don't know about you, but I would spend my whole life just whining and complaining about stuff and I'd never get anything done.
Yeah, it's really easy. There's so many things. I like the idea of a jar. I was thinking you were going to say like dollars, putting dollars in every time, because then you could take yourself to like a really nice dinner, after a couple of days or a week. But, so I want to, in the interview, I usually ask people, and sometimes I've forgotten, actually. I realized in the last few interviews, I totally forgot. But I love to know what is inspiring people like right now, whether that's something super fancy and artsy or, a television show. So what is inspiring you this week?
So my kids are age 1 and age 3. And lately I've been challenging myself to try to see the world as much the way they see it as I can and try to see things sort of with that same excitement of like a kid who's seeing something for the first time. So my son, who's 3, my husband and I have been slowly watching the original Star Wars movies with him. And we watched The Empire Strikes Back the other day. And okay, we're going to, people are probably thinking like, gasp, horrible parent letting a 3-year-old watch Empire Strikes Back. We talked about it. The Emperor's going to get a major timeout after he like was mean to Darth Vader at the end of Jedi,
That's great.
But that moment, right, in Empire Strikes Back where Darth Vader says, Luke, I am your father. The look on my son's face when that line was spoken, it was like his mind exploded. And like the first time I saw that movie was, I was probably like 5 or something or 6. And, my mind probably exploded at the time, but like, I don't remember it. Yeah. So kind of experiencing that same level of just complete and total surprise and excitement and like, oh my gosh, seeing that through my son's eyes was just incredible. And then again, when we saw Jedi and like that moment when, Leia takes the bounty hunter mask off and she's like, someone who loves you. And I thought his little brain was going to explode for a second time. So, but yeah, so that's kind of what I've been trying to do the last few weeks is sort of experience the world as much through my kids' eyes as I can, because they have this like really pure perspective and also very unfiltered perspective, because they haven't seen all these other things or experienced all these other things that sort of cloud or shade the way they look at stuff. So
I love that. That's so simple and yet, just such a fantastic way. Every so often I have that like moment where I'm like, I see that wonder and I'm like, oh yeah. Unfortunately my kids, my older boys, when they saw Star Wars, well, when they saw the original 3, somebody at school had already told them. And they're like, Mom, we already know. And I was like, okay. I was like,
that was partially our reasoning for letting him watch it so young, is that he's going to be that kid in school who's telling all his friends about, the reveal ending, but whatever. So anyway, people are probably like freaking out that, we're letting our 3-year-old watch Star Wars.
I don't think this is alone. And I don't always have the best judgment with like kids and movies. I let my boys, they're 5 and 7, watch Jurassic World. And my husband was like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, it's just dinosaurs eating people. It's not people eating people. And he was like, let's talk. Like, we need to have a talk later. But everybody in their school had also seen it, and that's not why I let them watch it. But I found that out later. They're like, oh no, all of our friends have also seen it. And I was like, oh, well, I'm not the only parent with questionable judgment.
The crazy thing too, and this is something that's sort of profoundly fascinating with like really little kids, like preschoolers, is that their understanding of what's actual pretend and what's sort of realistic pretend and then what's real is completely blurred. Like my son is less terrified by Star Wars or the Ghostbusters movie. He thinks it's hilarious. Yeah. And yet when he watches like Jake and the Neverland Pirates, the episode when Captain Hook turns into a ghost, OMG, he is terrified of it. So like, I think there's also that level of like, you just don't know what's going to really, make your child nervous, or what they're just going to look at and be like, oh yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it is really interesting to see that. So that's a fun thing to do. If you have kids, think about that this week, to be looking at how they look at the world, and what that could sort of inspire you to. I love that. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I feel like, had we gone to school together, we would have been BFFs,
Oh, totally.
Staying up all night and maybe doing work and asking to stay forever, and weird extensions on papers, like total high five right here.
Yay!
Well, I will definitely send people your way to DIY MFA if you guys want to hear more from Gabriela and join the awesome community that is happening over there. Clearly, you got to sign up for the email list to get in there. And so you want to see what's going on. You want to take some courses and learn some great practical tools, and not just start with, like, as she said, sort of like the nuts and bolts things, but how do you work before you get to how to write a character? How do you work finding your process? So super helpful. I really appreciate all the things you're doing, and I'm glad we got to talk.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
October's almost over and the dark nights are closing in again.
Okay, do you feel like you know your process a little bit better? Are you inspired to head out and find your writing process? Sometimes this does take, as Gabriela said, a little bit of trial and error as you start to kind of work and see what works for you, see what doesn't work for you, check your output, see what enables you to be kind to yourself and get some sleep at night, your perfect amount. Maybe that's 5 hours like me, maybe that's 8 like her, but whatever this looks like for you, if you are able to find your writing process, you are going to work much better. You're going to be more efficient. And I think that the output is going to be a much higher quality product, quality writing than it would be if you are trying to use somebody else's process, or you're just kind of sliding into your chair and typing on the keys without even thinking about it or being focused. So think about your writing process. And I'd love to hear your comments of what your process is like, because this is different for everybody. We'll have a conversation about it in the Facebook group, but you can also leave a comment at the show notes, createifwriting.com/031. And if you want to check out Gabriela and what she's up to, you can find her at DIYMFA.com. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you have an inspired week.